We'll wait a couple more minutes to let other people in. And if you're seeing the poll and would like to participate, please do so. Completely up to you. We're working on a way to get music on this because it's strange with completely no sound. And we'll wait another minute or two and begin. Okay, I'm going to look and see. I'm getting some emails from people who are having a problem joining. So if you'll just bear with me a moment while I check on that. Okay, so it would appear I want to, there is someone named Lydia and someone named Mary Hollis on this call, and I want to say thank you so much. There seems to be a link error. Um, and I am going to go ahead and send a different link. The one that I sent previously is apparently not working. Oh wait, now people are joining. And this is why we have a tech check at 5. Let me see. Okay, well, I know what I sent. No, what's this? Oh, okay, now people are joining. I'm not sure what's going on, and I apologize profusely for that.
Tracy, I just think it's a spooky start. It's
I do
okay.
think it's a spooky
Yeah.
start. I'm not sure what else to do about that. Uh, I've used the same exact link for everything, so I don't know why some people are making it and some people aren't. All I can do is, okay, interesting. I've sent the link twice.
Hmm. Well, we appreciate everyone who persevered to the entrance of the Zoom event. We have a few technical difficulties, as you may be aware. Just give us a quick second. Tracy's going to kick this off with intros just here in a few minutes. And don't worry, this webinar is being recorded, so it'll be available later on our YouTube channel.
Okay. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and oh, okay. So apparently there's a problem getting signed in. We're getting some information now, but it seems to be working. I don't want to delay any longer because of our presenters have their own things to get to. So we will start, and anyone who had a problem getting in, we will definitely send them the link to the recording. But let's go ahead and start. Phew. Okay. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for the Business of Grief, Veils, Voices, and the Spectacle of Victorian Mourning. Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Anderson with the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission, and with me tonight is my colleague, Laura Gonzalez. We're so glad you're spending your evening with us. We know how busy life gets and how many options you have, so it means a lot that you chose to be here with us. Tonight, we're excited to give you the opportunity to explore the fascinating world of spiritualism and mourning practices in the Victorian era, and to share more about the work we do at the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission. We are the nonprofit partner of the Texas Historical Commission, and we support historic preservation and education efforts all around the state. If you'd like to learn more about us or ways to get involved, visit the What We Do page at thcfriends.org. That's thcfriends.org. A warm welcome to THC commissioners, Friends trustees, and the colleagues and friends from the Texas Historical Commission. We're happy to have you here with us tonight. A huge thank you to everyone who supported us through our virtual events series. Your generosity makes these programs possible. It's not too late to give. Laura and I will be dropping links into the chat, and our follow-up email will provide more information about ways you can support us so that we can support the THC. If you haven't already, please follow us on social media. We'd love to connect with you there. It's also a great place to read about upcoming events and programs like Holidays on the Trail in November, where we'll explore how being out on the range impacted cowboys during the holidays, and quite possibly get a peek at the official state of Texas longhorn herd. And in December, we have Visions of Sugar Plums, cooking historic recipes for Christmas. Maybe you'll be inspired to make tasty treats for your holiday dessert. Before we dive in, just a few quick housekeeping notes. Please keep your microphones Please keep your microphones off during the presentation. We'll have a Q&A at the end, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat anytime. We'll try to get to them as we are able. Tonight's event is being recorded, as I've mentioned many, many times at this point, and everyone who registered with an email address will get a link to the recording. You're welcome to share that with your friends who couldn't make it tonight, and the recording will also be posted to our YouTube channel. The email will include a list of any resources, links, or book recommendations mentioned by our presenters. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our colleagues from the THC Historic Sites Division. Cortney Smith has been an educator at the Fulton Mansion State Historic Site for nearly 2 years. She holds a BA in Classical Studies and History and an MA in History with a specialization in Public History. In addition to the Fulton Mansion, she has worked at the Sam Bell House State Historic Site, the National Museum of the Pacific War, and as a tour guide at the Capitol Visitor Center. Elana Barton is the educator-interpreter at the Sam Bell Maxey House State Historic Site. Elana has a Bachelor's of Science for UNT and a Master's of Science and Information Studies Library and Archives. She previously worked at the Northeast Texas Children's Museum. Joanne Soward serves as an educator at the Fulton Mansion State Historic Site. She holds a BA in History and Art History. An avid genealogist, she has conducted archival work across the Czech Republic, Sweden, Germany, the Netherlands, and Scotland. Welcome, ladies. Let's get started.
There we go. Can everybody hear me? All right, awesome. Well, as she mentioned, my name is, sorry, a motorcycle went by right as I said that. My name is Cortney. I'm an educator here at the Fulton Mansion. We wanted to start by telling you just a little bit about our different sites. So the Fulton Mansion is in Rockport, Texas, which is just outside of Corpus Christi, and it's an 1877 historic home which was built for George and Harriet Fulton. Pretty prominent couple here in the area, made their money in the cattle ranching business. But it's also very engineering and technologically advanced. So it had central heat, indoor plumbing, hot water, and gas lighting, all when it was built in 1877. And I'm going to give it up to Elana for just a moment so she can tell you about Sam Bell Maxey.
Yes, so the Sam Bell Maxey House is up in Northeast Texas in Paris. So the Maxey House was the home of Sam Bell Maxey, a Mexican War veteran, attorney, Confederate general, and U.S. Senator. His family moved into their newly built Italianate home on the south side of Paris in 1868, where 2 generations of the Maxey family navigated the political and social landscape of Texas from the Reconstruction era until the mid-1960s. Today, the house is restored and showcases more than 10,000 original family furnishings, clothing, letters that illustrate the lives of both generations.
Thank you. So today, forget to change the slide. There we go. I'll get the hang of this eventually. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about dealing with death, some mourning practices in the Victorian era. Today, outside of certain professions, it is rare for people to actually encounter death. Oftentimes it happens away from home, in a hospital, and very quickly, and is a private thing with family and loved ones. However, in the 19th century, it was a little different. Death was very much part of everyday life, between different, there we go, train of thought. Death was a part of everyday life. People rarely visited the rare hospitals that existed. Sometimes even doctors didn't come to the home. Illnesses were treated there at home with the family. When you can buy morphine at the store, doctor not always needed. And so between, that plus the everyday illnesses, pneumonia, influenza, different infections, just death was a part of life. Childbirth was the highest rate of, or the largest reason for women's death in the time period. Child mortality was also quite high. Despite all this, Victorians did have certain ways that they were required or traditionally dealt with death, as far as their mourning practices, how they dressed, things they invented, how they grieved, things like that. So we're going to dive into that a little bit today. Now, since I mentioned most ill people were treated at home, it makes sense that most people also passed in the home and were then held in wake in their own parlors. The wake served two functions. One was so that people could come and have enough time to travel to the home to visit their loved one. It also served as an opportunity to make sure your loved one's actually dead. Yes, being buried alive was a pretty common fear of the time, and it's prevalent throughout their literature, their inventions, and their traditions. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, you may be thinking about some obvious problems with holding a wake in the parlor, because it often lasted for several days, buying people time to travel, make sure they're dead. There are some problems with having a body on display for that length of time. Wakes, oh wait, I already said that. Forget my notes. We're just going to talk. All right, so this is before embalming became common practice. During the Civil War, embalming became more prevalent because they were needing to ship people back home to their families over long distances. But even as the practice grew, it was still very restricted to the wealthy living in the big cities. This wasn't something that made it into the rural area and was commonplace. And so Victorians had to find ways around certain things like decay in their own parlor. One way of this is something we still see today, having lots of flowers at a wake to kind of mask the smell. Another one is also going to be the invention of ice caskets. Now, ice caskets are pretty much what you think they are. It's a temporary casket meant to be a place where they can put the body, kind of keep it cool, help preserve it for the long run until they're able to transfer the deceased to the casket they're going to be buried in after the funeral. So ice would be placed have a section into the top of the casket for cold air to travel through and help preserve the body. Now, there was also always kind of a viewing area because you needed to keep the casket sealed for that ice to not melt and to preserve your loved one. And so you had a place to view into the casket. Sometimes they even had areas that moved. So you could move the viewing area where it needed to be the angle-wise to prevent glare. Now, this is an interesting casket here because you can see, I guess I can use my little mouse, can I? This is where your loved one lays, but then on top is going to be the ice area. And then here's the viewing window I mentioned. Now, if you go, this is a different version they called this one a corpse preserving casket. It's from 1871. And this is actually an ice box on top that attaches to the casket. And that way cool air could circulate through. Many of these caskets also had a drip pan. That way you would know when all your ice was melted and that you needed to replace it. They actually advertised this ice box here as something that could be attached not just to caskets, but to any enclosed vessel that you needed to keep things cool in, be it meat, animal, or vegetables. So I guess Victorians like the duality. You can use things have multiple purposes. Not sure you'd be reusing it, but it has multiple purposes. Now, as far as spreading the word about after someone passes, you want to get them to that wake, you want to get them to that funeral, and so you would send out letters. Now, most of the time these letters and their envelopes would have a black border around the edge. This is an example we've put together of what George Fulton's could have looked like. We actually do have none from his funeral, so we kind of recreated it based on common cards or other cards from the time period. So this is how you would notify, your friends and loved ones afar, but community members would find out a little differently. They would take the notice from visual cues from the house itself. So you would adorn your house with black bows, other fabrics, you close the shutters, cover the doorknob. These were all visual cues to anyone walking by that you had lost somebody and that they were to not bother you and to pass the house quietly and quickly. You needed to be kind of kept, you were required to keep yourself from society for a time being, and they were to be respectful of that. And so this here is a picture of just kind of what I described. Now, inside the home, you would also have certain cues. After someone passes away, time stops, literally. You stop the clocks at the time of death, and they don't restart until after the funeral is over. You would also cover all the mirrors. So Victorians believed that reflective spaces, or reflective surfaces, excuse me, could trap spirits. So you want to make sure to cover all of your mirrors after somebody passes in the home. That way your loved one can move on to a better place rather than getting trapped inside the home in your mirrors. Now, I do want to talk to you a little bit about funerals, and so I'm going to use George Fulton's funeral as an example. After he passed away, he was held in wake for just a few days. He passed October 30th, 1893, and then his funeral was held on November 1st. I know this tombstone, this monument in Rockport Cemetery says October 31st. It was actually put on the tombstone incorrectly. We actually believe he passed on October 30th. But after the wake was over, his pallbearers took him out of the front door of the mansion into a horse-drawn hearse waiting and taking him to the Episcopal church in town where the funeral service was held. This was the largest funeral in South Texas that had been seen up to that point. The flags were lowered at half staff. They closed schools and businesses. That way people could attend the services. So this was a pretty big deal. And then he was buried at the Rockport Cemetery here in Rockport, Texas. Now, I mentioned earlier that people were afraid of being buried alive. This is prevalent in literature, such as Edgar Allan Poe's short stories, but also in their inventions. So here we have an invention for a coffin alarm. So this is actually underground. This is a picture, an image of the casket underground already, but it's got a system in here designed that way you could ring a bell should you find yourself prematurely buried. And you could alert those above ground that you needed to be let out. Now, here's another example over here on the left-hand side. This is an approved burial case patent from 1868. And this one actually has a handy-dandy ladder for him to climb out of should the need arise. Now, being buried alive wasn't the only fear of the time. There was also the fear of grave robbing and having your body snatched. So this is a time when science is really growing. You see people robbing graves in order to experiment on bodies and use them for science and different things. And so this person actually, this is called a hooded grave here on the right side. So it's a cage or an enclosed fence around the coffin, the grave, in order to prevent grave robbing. This one in particular I found, it's a hooded grave of Sarah Ann Thomas Boone in Columbia County, Pennsylvania. She was in her early 20s and she had just recently passed away in childbirth. And so that could have been a reason they decided to hood her grave to prevent her body from being stolen to be studied with childbirth in mind. Now, of course, grieving, just like today, it didn't end with the burial. That's a personal journey everyone goes on, and they decide for themselves how, what their own feelings are and how they grieve. But how you present yourself to society in the Victorian time had strict rules as far as visual cues went. For instance, mourning became very connected with fashion, particularly after Queen Victoria mourned her husband for 40 years. Now, not everyone had to mourn their husband for 40 years. That was a choice she made. But it was 2 years was kind of the standing point for how long a widowed woman would be required to dress in all black,
Joanne, we need you to
Here we
unmute.
go.
There we go.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, thank you so much. So today we're delving into the fascinating world of headstone symbolism during the Victorian era. Victorian society placed a great importance on symbolism and meaning, and headstones were no exception. So these symbols offer us a window into the values and the emotions of the Victorian era, and allowing us to walk among these, we get a deeper understanding. Okay, here we go. Okay. So when I started to prepare for this webinar, I looked back at my family and my own ancestors' headstones. And this is an image of my great-great-grandparents' headstone in Kirk in Lavaca County. So I grew up seeing these, and I just loved walking through the cemeteries in Lavaca and Fayette counties. For this webinar, most images are from the LaGrange cemeteries because I feel that they really represent the most diversity. And so you can walk with me through these memories in stone. The cemeteries images I used from were the old LaGrange City Cemetery, the old LaGrange Black Cemetery, the LaGrange Jewish Cemetery, the Pine Springs Cemetery in the Flatonia area, and Oak Hill in Flatonia. So we start with the sentimentality and exuberance that these, I wanted to share this. So the Victorians loved the heartfelt epithets that spoke to the deceased and to the mourners also. They blended Bible promises with poetry, and stones often paired the full identity lines, so the full name, exact birth, and death dates with the tender appeals. I really liked this one. It says, "Weep not, mother, the dead shall rise again." And this is in memory of Willie Norton. And it was erected by his stepfather. So it's a message to his wife, which is Willie's mom, not to weep, the dead will rise again. So I just think that's very, very, very sweet, and kind of gives you a little insight into how much he was loved and how much the husband loves his wife. And ministers and community leaders could receive especially exuberant send-offs. We have Reverend Neville's, whose stone promises rest after labor. So it says, "Sleep on, Father, thy work is done, the Lord is come and borne thee home." And they're just wonderful, and I saw this a lot. Just very nice messages. Okay. So now, as Cortney said, very high mortality rate. And so the Victorian parents used, for their children's gravestones, they used tender imagery to express grief and hope. Florals were especially common. So you would see on a lot of headstones, you see flowers, and the openness corresponds with how far they were in life. So a bud that had not opened yet would be for a newborn. And then, as if it were a woman, 70 years old, it would be a full bloom rose. And a single flower bud or snapped stem, you want to look at that also, could symbolize an infant who lived only a few days. And so we have infant Paul, that's the first headstone, and he lived 9 days. Morning glories, which open and fade within a day, also symbolize the brevity of life. Then on the next, we have a lamb, and lambs appeared frequently to represent, the child as part of Christ's flock, innocent and protected by God. Oh, protected by the Good Shepherd. We have Dionysus Oliver, and a really nice small lamb. And then the size of the lamb or the age of the lamb would also correspond to the age of the deceased. Doves are sometimes carved, and it would give a little bit more thought than just a stark date alone, by itself. Okay, love lost. And so here we have holding hands, and that represents a final farewell or a welcome to heaven. And so you really do see these clasped hands a lot. So they're typically depicted as right hands, with one hand usually flat and loose, and its fingers extended, representing a husband and a wife sharing a last embrace. The other hand may be more frilly, suggesting a woman's hand, or adorned with cufflinks, indicating the man's hand. So together, these hands symbolize the everlasting bond of a couple and their hope of reuniting again in heaven. And then we have, this is a nice sentiment. And then there's one in the Netherlands that is amazing. So here we go. So this is called the grave with the little hands. And the grave with the little hands is, as it's referred to, symbolizes love and resilience through the joined graves of Colonel Jacobs and a noblewoman named Josephina. Despite their different faiths and social classes, they married in 1842, defying the society norms at that time. When Jacob passed away in 1880, they could not be buried in the same cemetery because of the religious segregation. But she ingeniously arranged for the plots to connect so she bought hers in the Catholic cemetery and he was in the Protestant cemetery, closest to the wall between them, and then arranged for the two to connect with their hands. And I just think it's absolutely wonderful. So this is definitely love triumphing beautifully. So we have also the loss of young ladies, and these pictures are from LaGrange and the old city cemetery. And growing up, we would drive by this all the time. And I just thought it was the most beautiful thing. Yeah, these are both from the old LaGrange City Cemetery. And both of these are for ladies that had passed away at the age of 20. So the rose imagery, again, you see with a snapped rose of a life cut short, and youthful age, the untimely death of both women highlight life's unpredictability and the value of time. And we're going to go into the angels a little bit. The weeping angel is to symbolize comfort and leading the soul to heaven. This is the weeping angel of Louise Miller, again in the old LaGrange Cemetery. So even this is where I love my art history, the Egyptians, Mesopotamians, the Greco-Roman art, they had winged beings. That was in, of course, their pottery, their vases, murals, and they were messengers between the two realms. And then in medieval period, the angels evolved into guardians for the deceased. And Renaissance really took it to a whole nother level and more elaborate. The angels were symbolizing hope and the life and death cycle. And then finally, the Victorians, they really favored angels as comforting and representing transition and reflecting deep emotion. So then you get the weeping angel. I just I think that's beautiful. Okay. And this, I went into nature motifs, and there were lots of things to choose from. So here we have a tree trunk with the falling leaves, and it represents the continuity of the family lineage. And then on the next, it has a dove encircling, or a wreath encircling a dove. And the wreath symbolizes victory and eternity, the unbroken wreath. And then with the soul's peace and ascent, which is the dove. So it's taking that victory and eternity along with being at peace. So roses or laurels woven into that wreath added layers. So then you have love, virtue, triumph over death, and in all of the meanings. And then the tree stump is just beautifully carved, and even the rope, the scroll work, and then you have also leaves at the bottom, and the little limbs coming off represent the family tree. So that's and she was 77 years old. So that was very important for them to show that she had that she left behind a family lineage. Oops. So this one, when I saw it, I just had to do a little bit more research on it. And it's a triangle with the SMT on it with 777 across it, and then 333 at the bottom. So it's a fraternal emblem, and you see a lot of these also. So the SMT inside of the triangle represents the Sisters of the Mysterious 10. It was the Women's Auxiliary of the United Brothers of Friendship, which is an African-American benevolent society that was active in Texas at this time. Their grave marks commonly use the triangle with the letters SMT. The 333 is most likely their temple number, or you would say like their chapter number. And then the 777 would coincide with the men's group. And so it symbolizes that she belonged to the Sisters of the Mysterious 10, Temple 333, and belonging to the with the United Brothers of Friendship. And then we have also fraternal organizations. So this is Willie Fields is the first, and it shows the United Brothers of Friendship stone, which is again the triangle, and it has the triangle broken up into patches. And then on the right, we also have the Masonic Lodge, and that's Mr. Nichols. And for the Masonic Lodge, it's the square and the compass, the all-seeing eye, the broken columns, and all signifying the moral integrity and remembrance. And the inscriptions are: his words were kindness, his deeds were love, his spirit humble, he rests above. And I just think that's lovely. And the title of this is The Business of Grief. And so I wanted to go into that a little bit. And in my hometown of Flatonia, I've driven by this monument for 40 years. And so I wanted to go into doing a little research on what it would cost, what, how was this common, or, it just seemed to stand out so much. So the key points, what you're seeing is a mixed stone. It has an architectural style. And it was also found in late Victorian catalogs. So you could order that and have it brought by train. And then the train went as far as LaGrange, and then it would have to be brought over by a horse and buggy from there. So it has marble and granite. So the late Victorian monument list, a simple marble tablet would be $10 to $30. But this, however, it's a 2-column marble, polished granite urn, an arch with an urn. It has 2 bases, and it has a foundation, the freight by rail, and then it had to be professionally set. So all of that would be between $175 and $340 at that time period. And that coincides to today, if you have a multiplier of 33, that would be between $6,000 and $11,000 today. But that's just the multiplier. What it would actually cost would be somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000 plus installation in today, if you were going to buy this today. So, and this is for a young lady who was, again, 20 years old. So they loved her and wanted her remembered very, very well. So we're looking at the cemeteries and wanted to go into the Hispanic culture of remembering the deceased in the Hispanic traditions. And so, as Cortney said, it doesn't just end at the funeral. So the Day of the Dead is one of the most vibrant, well-known, even today, Hispanic traditions. And this holiday honors the deceased by visiting the cemetery to clean the graves and to decorate them. So they would decorate with flowers, candles, and ofrendas, which is food and personal item offerings. And it's a time for families to come together to celebrate the lives of those who passed and to blend the indigenous and the Catholic traditions in a joyous remembrance. So looking at an ofrenda, it would be marigold and essential oils for our incense. It enhances the altar's aroma and helps guide the soul to the ofrenda. You would have sweets, so sugar skull cookies are very popular. Food, corn, fruit, chocolate. I'm going to say it wrong. It's pan de mero. I know what it looks like. So it's the bread for the dead, and for sustenance during the visit. So, and then decorations would be photographs of the deceased, items that represented them, salt for purification, and then the skeletal figures. And that is the symbolism of that is to remind us of our mortality. The symbolism of these items is the 4 elements. So you have earth, which is the food, water, purification, and it's water or tequila, very traditional. Fire is seen in the candles, and then the air is the papal pecado, and that blows in the air. So those are, and you see them to this day. So I would like to thank Stacy Sneed and Connie Sneed. That's where I got most of the photos. And they took the photos and transcribed the markers. And that really allows us to preserve and reflect on the stories of those that came before. And I also used findagrave.com. And like I said, and then those are the cemeteries that we visited. Oh, I'm so sorry. There's the ofrenda. I'm so sorry. I did not advance. So, and that is the orange, the marigolds, the incense, sweets, food, decorations, and the skeletons. And so Stacy Sneed and Connie Sneed. And I will pass it over to Elana.
Okay, so I would like to start my portion out. We're talking about, we're speaking about the dead. Speaking of the dead, spiritualism in the Victorian era. I'd like to start by asking a question. Would you pay money to hear the voice of a lost loved one just one more time? So as Cortney mentioned, this is not just a hypothetical thing. Death was all around them all the time. High mortality rates were very common. Epidemics, wars were a big deal back then. It meant that most families experienced the loss of loved ones all the time. In this atmosphere of grief and curiosity, a movement called spiritualism took place. The belief that the living could communicate with the spirits of the dead. So you could say that the first inklings of the spiritualist movement began with Swedish polymath Emanuel Swedenborg in the 1740s when he wrote about dreams and visions he experienced. He claimed he could freely visit heaven and hell to converse with angels, demons, and other spirits. A few decades later, Franz Mesmer developed the technique of inducing trances and causing subjects to claim contact with supernatural beings. So mesmerism or hypnosis later became a large part of spiritualism. In the United States, the Second Great Awakening of the 1840s resulted in several religious movements, including Millerism, Mormonism, and, of course, spiritualism. But the real beginning of spiritualism takes place because of two little girls. On March 31st, 1848, the Fox sisters, 14-year-old Maggie and 11-year-old Kate, convinced their neighbors that an unsettling series of knockings and tappings in their home was coming from the spirit world. Soon the whole town of Hydesville, New York, was gripped by the mysterious noises that haunted the Fox family. A spirit called Mr. Slipfoot. Their older sister Leah capitalized on their talents by turning the family's home into a public spectacle. By 1849, the public began paying the sisters to see these demonstrations, or seances. The Fox sisters' story spread rapidly, and soon people across the country were trying seances in their very own parlors. So the movement spread through a network of itinerant mediums conducting seances and lectures throughout the country, as well as publications that reported spiritualist phenomena such as the Spiritual Telegraph. This publication ran from 1852 to 1860. By the late 1850s, spiritualism became an organized religion with a declaration of principles by the Convention of Spiritualists. The movement reached people of all backgrounds and was particularly popular with women looking for a voice and power in the religious realm. By the mid-19th century, spiritualism crossed the Atlantic and found a especially eager audience in Britain. The Victorians were fascinated by the idea. As Cortney mentioned earlier, Queen Victoria was famous for mourning her deceased husband, Prince Albert, for decades. And she kind of brought about the symbol of the Victorian era's pervasive grief and the elaborate mourning rituals that define the age. Because death was just never very far away. It was a part of daily life, especially during the Civil War here in the US and the Crimean War over in Europe. And as you can see here on the left, you could go to a mourning store in Philadelphia. So on both sides of the Atlantic, mourning rituals were very elaborate, cemeteries were visited often, and the possibility of reaching across the veil was both comforting and thrilling. The rise of science and technology also played a role in the spiritualism spread. The telegraph, for example, had been invented in 1837 and widely became used during and after the Civil War. If people could send messages instantly across the wires, why not messages across the barrier of life and death? Many thought spiritualism might be the next great scientific discovery. Thomas Edison planned to create a device that would allow communication with the dead. He fully intended this to be a scientific endeavor, however, unlike the mediums of the spiritualist movement, who conducted the seances that would become so popular in the second half of the 19th and even until the 20th century. So, what did a seance look like? Picture a darkened parlor. A group of people sit around a table, holding hands or having their hands on the tables, just waiting to see what was going to happen. The medium, usually a woman, would call upon the spirits. Then the wonders began. Strange knocks echoed in the room. Cold breezes blew across people's faces. Spirit trumpets or instruments floated in the air. Ghostly hands would reach out in the darkness, and tables would rock or even start flying. It all sounds eerie, but many of these effects were actually just clever tricks. Mediums used hidden wires, magnets, and even accomplices planted in the audience. Some slipped under the table to knock or pull at people's clothing. And you can see in the photo here, a man named William Marriott, he published a document about with the effort to debunk these mediums and how they did these seances. Some mediums would use phosphorescent paint to make glowing figures appear in the dark. Others, just like this lady here in this photo, would use cheesecloth to produce ectoplasm, a supernatural substance that exudes from the body of the medium during a trance. And this, of course, is where Ghostbusters gets the goo left behind by ghosts in the movies. Another contraption used by mediums were spirit cabinets. You can see those on the left. This was a medium's workspace in the form of furniture or a curtained off corner that would attract and conserve spiritual forces. So inside, the medium's hands and feet were bound, while objects like musical instruments would play or ghostly forms would emerge from behind the curtain. In reality, the mediums would get loose from their bindings and perform the spirit antics behind closed doors or the curtain. Of course, they would make sure to be tied up again before being revealed at the end of the performance. And on the right, you can see spirit photographs. So these were also used to further the illusion by using techniques like double exposure and the negative manipulation to produce ghostly images for bereaved individuals seeking connection with their lost loved ones. So audiences were willing to suspend disbelief in spiritualism. Even the most outlandish demonstrations felt possible in a time when science was revealing new wonders every day. Indeed, spiritualism wasn't confined to back rooms and shadows. Even respected scientists and famous authors took notice. So Sir William Crookes on the left, he was a British chemist and physicist who investigated mediums and published reports suggesting that some of the spectacles were genuine. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Charles Dickens were members of the Ghost Club, a group who focused on the scientific study of alleged paranormal activity. And First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln famously hosted seances in the Red Room of the White House after the death of her son Willie. And she would later go on to visit a spirit photographer around 1870 to get her photo with President Lincoln well after his death. And just 5 years after the Fox sisters started the movement in 1848, a song called Spirit Rappings was written and available as sheet music. So you could bring it into your home and sing it with your friends around a piano. You are welcome to scan the QR code here to listen to the YouTube video after the presentation, but we'll also send a link out later for you to view at your leisure. Now, skepticism would bring spiritualism to a decline in the early 20th century. Magician Harry Houdini famously worked to expose fraudulent mediums, saying that up to the present time, everything I have investigated has been the result of deluded brains. And in 1888, Maggie Fox admitted that her famous spirit raps were made by them cracking their toe joints. Though she later recanted the confession because she needed the money, their story showed how fragile the movement's credibility could actually be. Mediums began to be exposed left and right. This woman, Helen Duncan, was photographed during one of her seances, specifically with her spirit guide, Peggy. These photographs revealed the spirits to be fraudulently produced using dolls from painted papier-mâché masks draped in old sheets. Still, spiritualism left a huge mark. Newspapers reported on seances, magicians borrowed techniques from mediums to create stage illusions. Writers and artists used spiritualist themes in their work. And even today, the image of a Victorian seance, people gathered around a table in the dark, is instantly recognizable. For Victorian, spiritualism was more than entertainment. It was a way to find comfort in grief, to merge faith with science, and to explore the mysteries of life and death. As time went on, spiritualism began to lose its power over the public imagination. Too many mediums were exposed as frauds, and what was once felt like evidence of the afterlife came to look more like clever illusions. The science and technology that were originally embraced as opportunities for spiritualism were racing ahead. Inventions like the telephone, electric light, and the motion picture offered new wonders that didn't rely on the supernatural. And psychology began exploring the experiences of seances in human terms, suggestion, grief, and the longing to believe. By the early 20th century, spiritualism had faded from fashionable drawing rooms into smaller circles of true believers. It never vanished entirely, but it no longer held the same spell over society. Still, behind the fraud and the fading candlelight was something very real, a deep human desire to stay connected with those we've lost. So the next time you see an image of Victorians holding hands around a table, remember, they weren't just chasing ghosts, they were chasing hope. Thank you.
Ladies, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentations and your joint presentation. We do have a few questions that have cropped up. Lorelai, you want to parse those out and see if we can get some answers?
Yes, indeed I do. Thank you, Tracy. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so the first question I have kind of goes back to Cortney's presentation, and she had mentioned a mourning period where you were kind of closed off and ensconced from society, and I wanted to know a little bit more about that time frame. If you could share a little bit more about how long people were, how long it was appropriate for people to keep themselves from society.
I know specifically for widowed women, it was mostly during that deep mourning period. So of course, as with any societal standards, what you're supposed to do is always changing, even during like a period of time. You're always getting new information on what you're supposed to do. So that time did change over the course of the Victorian era. But a lot of times it was kind of that during that deep mourning period I mentioned. So that first year or so, once you started to kind of exit the mourning period and do your half mourning, you could start to attend more of those functions.
So a year.
And start to socially visit more.
Wow, that's super intense, y'all. Okay. So Meg, who's joining us through Facebook, wants to know what was unique about or factored into the Victorian era's observations and customs around death? Specifically during that time frame, what was unique or kind of what they brought into it that was very special? And she references a comparison to the Georgian era.
I might be able to speak to this a little bit. I do know that I really do think that Queen Victoria was a huge influence on that. That's why we named the whole era after her. When she passed away, it was beginning of a new era, a new time period, and it was people look forward to the future again, I think. So that might have been part of it. And death was just so common during the Victorian era, and I think a lot of the technology and medicine had updated, so maybe there wasn't quite as much death. Things like hygiene became more prevalent as well. So that might have been another part of it.
Amen. Thank you for that. Elena, let's stay with you real quick on the spiritualism topic. When you mentioned that it became a religion, was it like an official religion, or was it more like ritualistic, kind of like Shintoism, where it's just a lot of like very specific practices that one follows?
So it did become a real religion, and it still is to this day a real religion. There are spiritualist churches that you can go to. I think there's one in Austin, in fact, so
Wow.
go check
Okay.
it out.
Okay. So we have a question that's concerning the funeral notice, like the official notice that people were received by mail. This is a technical question. Do y'all know about how long it took for people who were out of the city or the state where the deceased was, how long it took for them to get that mail?
It could have taken a couple weeks. Mail traveled a lot slower than it does today. And a lot of times you had to go to the post office to pick it up yourself. And so it depended on kind of how far it was going, but it could have been, a few weeks. So when you're sending out that notice, it wouldn't necessarily be invitation to come, to the service, the wake, or the funeral, because by the time they got it, they've likely already buried their loved one. But these were notices to make it clear, not make it clear, but let it be known that this is what's happened. There's been a change in our situation. Please send your condolences. This is the funeral information if you are able to come, but it's also just nice to have. And those letters and envelopes could have been purchased, mourning stores, catalogs, things like that.
So it wasn't necessarily an invitation, more of a notification. And then that was part of how you mentioned that the mourning period took so long that people could just keep kind of showing up.
Not necessarily. I'm not sure they would have kept showing up. You would definitely send, if you could receive one of those letters, I imagine you would have sent, something in the mail to send your condolences. But your mourning period was mourning was very, how do I say this, solemn, very quiet, I don't want to say lonely, but you were kind of away from society for at least a little bit. If you had the leisure to do so, at least. Of course, not every family, like the Fultons, could have abided by those societal norms.
Of course. Now, regarding these rules, were there some differences between rural and urban funeral practices and the mourning practices?
I'm going to say there are, and I'd like to actually do a little bit more research into that. Because of course, any differences between rural and urban have to do with resources. It has to do with social class. It has to do with your occupation. Clearly, if you're running a ranch, you can't afford to take a step back from society or your business or things like that. And so there definitely were differences. I just can't necessarily at this time speak to particulars unless anybody else could. But I am interested in doing more research along that avenue.
That sounds great. And I'm sure we'd love to host y'all again next October. to dig further into it. And we do have an audience member who wants to dig further into some specifics, specifically around death and mourning around the 1910s. Can any of y'all speak specifically to this time period?
I
No.
cannot. Can anybody else?
I do know that, so we have two generations that lived into in the Maxey House, and the second generation lived into the mid 60s. So a lot of the practices that Cortney spoke about did continue, I would say, up into probably the First World War. And by that point things had kind of changed a little bit. And I'll also say that a lot of the practices that Courtney talked about, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I think these were definitely more middle upper class practices. And so people that were rural were not going to be in those, classes. So I'm sure there were big differences in the way in the city versus not the way they would participate in these practices. So.
Right, the class differences as far as your ability to be more leisurely around your mourning. Right.
I do have a comment. What I saw, Flatonia would have been very rural. And after looking at that one headstone, that they were able to buy that because of the mail order catalogs. And so they were connected and they were able to get very nice things and brought in, especially as the railroad brought more accessibility to those items. So there were definitely, I think, and then of course by 1910, I think most of Texas was connected by the railroads. So it really did kind of blur the lines between the rural and the urban. And in the rural, you definitely had a lot more of the immigrants and working on the farms. And then they were able to hold on to those European customs also. And I think that's very important, but that's definitely something to look into.
Wonderful. Well, speaking of accessibility of items, we have an audience member who's curious about jewelry. We have specific reference about obsidian and jet jewelry, but the query is, do y'all know anything about the introduction of garnet jewelry worn during mourning?
That may have been brought in during half mourning when they could add a little bit of color, and the obsidian and the slate jet would be full mourning, and then maybe an amethyst, emerald, garnets for half mourning.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Were there, we want to say, viewings before the funeral, as far as like open casket situations?
So from my understanding, the wake is kind of like what we consider today's viewing. So that's kind of where that evolution came from. The wakes were often, I don't have statistics on whether they were all open or closed caskets. I think it depends on kind of the environment you're in, whether embalming took place or not. Certainly if you have those ice caskets, it's going to be a closed viewing because you want to be able to maintain that temperature inside. So that's when you have the viewing windows. But for say, if you were able to have your loved one embalmed, then it is possible you could have had, an open viewing for a little bit at least.
Okay. And last but not least, if any of y'all are in the know about this, could y'all share a little bit more about the mourning stores? Because that's definitely not like going to Lululemon.
Yeah, so I'm not very familiar with them, but the one I found was in Philadelphia, which was and still is a major city. And so I would assume there would be several, especially on the East Coast. Basically, you could get all the clothing that Courtney talked about, especially for women. This is a very big business for women. And you could also get the stationery, basically mourning stationery was a big deal. And I think, like Joanne was saying, more at the further west you went and the more rural you got, you could order a lot of these from catalogs. Catalogs were a really big deal as well. So I definitely think that the mourning stores were probably bigger on the East Coast and bigger cities, but you could definitely get some good stuff from catalogs as well.
Excellent. And Elena, you kind of helped us tee up for our very last question, which was, back in reference to gendered differences in society and how women were expected to mourn for much longer. Seems much more dramatic than our male counterparts. Was there some sort of societal punishment, some sort of ostracization that occurred should they put white lace on a little earlier?
To be honest, I wish I knew. I wish I could answer that question for you. But you also have to consider that these weren't, I don't want to say they weren't strict timetables, but there was, room a little bit for fluctuation. And so I'm not sure there would have been, I don't think anyone's keeping time. Of course, if you cut it short by 7 months, maybe there's definitely some gossip around town. But I can't say if there's any for positive punishment that's happening in this time period.
Got it. Well, ladies, thank you so much for the very robust Q&A. Tracy, I will turn it over to you.
All right. I do actually have one question. Why do we have any idea of why most of the mediums that perform seances were women at all? I know that seems like a strange, it just struck me when you mentioned it.
Yeah, that's one of the things that if I had the time, I would have delved a lot more into it because I agree, it's super fascinating. One of the things I read kind of touched on the fact that, in Judeo-Christian religion, most women don't have power. They're not able to be the ones to speak, right? And so, mediums, being mostly women, they were able to get that power. They're the ones that were able um, to hold these seances more often than not. And the fact that it started with two girls, I think is another kind of driving force of that.
Cool. Interesting. Oh, our co-workers at the Port Isabel Lighthouse say females were believed to be more intuitive. There you go. That's a good thing. All right. Well, I want to thank all three of you for having joined us this evening. I again want to apologize for the snafus with Zoom. We're going to try and work those out. And I was very happy to see so many of you jump over to Facebook Live. We look forward to seeing you all again in November for our trail ride home from for the holidays. Ladies, good evening, and let me know what you want me to include in terms of resource work for the email I send out. Good night, everyone.